The Krelzar Empire had long been known as one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. They controlled dozens of systems and had the most advanced technology in the universe. They had conquered entire species, and their soldiers were feared across the stars. No one dared challenge them. The galaxy knew the Krelzar as ruthless conquerors, and their reputation was well earned. So when they set their sights on humanity, they didn't think twice. Humanity, at this point, had just recently joined the galactic community. They were known to be curious and determined, but no one had ever seen them as a threat. The other species thought that humans, with their primitive technology and small population, were no match for a massive empire like the Krelzar. The Krelzar, in particular, saw humanity as an easy target. They thought that taking over Earth would be just another victory to add to their list. The Krelzar made their move quickly. They sent their fleet of warships, well-equipped and ready for battle, to Earth. They expected a quick surrender. But what they didn't realize was that they were about to make a huge mistake. The leaders of the Krelzar Empire believed that humanity's governments would crumble under the pressure. They were sure that the humans would panic and give up. After all, the Krelzar had destroyed entire civilizations before with ease. So when they declared war on Earth, they did so with the certainty of victory. What they didn't know was that Earth's leaders were not about to back down. They had seen what the Krelzar had done to other species, and they knew the stakes were high. But instead of rushing into a battle they might lose, the humans decided to do something unexpected. Something the Krelzar would never see coming. The humans knew they couldn't win a direct fight with the Krelzar's superior forces. Their weapons were still too basic, their fleet too small. But they also knew that the Krelzar made one big mistake. They underestimated humanity. This was not just any species. It was a species that had survived on a deadly planet, fought countless wars, and rebuilt time and time again. Humanity had always found a way to overcome the odds, no matter how impossible it seemed. Earth's leaders came together in secret. They knew the only way to defeat the Krelzar was to surprise them. If the humans were to fight the Krelzar head-on, it would be a losing battle. So they came up with a plan that no one could have predicted. They would pretend to be weak, helpless. They would fake their vulnerability to lure the Krelzar into a false sense of security. The Krelzar were not just confident in their strength. They were overconfident. They thought humanity would crumble under the pressure of war. They didn't think twice about attacking Earth's colonies, destroying their cities one by one. They watched as Earth's military seemed to fall apart, as Earth's defenses looked overwhelmed. The Krelzar laughed. They thought this would be easy. But what the Krelzar didn't know was that Earth was setting a trap. Every time the Krelzar attacked a colony, they did so with the belief that they were crushing humanity. But behind the scenes, humanity was gathering its resources, strengthening its defenses, and preparing a surprise that would shock the Krelzar to their core. The Krelzar's generals were puzzled. They had expected Earth to resist. They had expected some kind of defense. But they didn't expect the humans to do nothing. As they watched the chaos unfold across the colonies, they began to believe they were winning. The Krelzar were starting to think that they had underestimated the humans, but only because they thought they had already won. They didn't see the bigger picture. They couldn't imagine that humanity was still in control. Meanwhile, the humans were preparing. They had a plan that was so ridiculous, it would be hard to believe even if you were on their side. Humanity wasn't just planning to defend themselves. They were planning to make the Krelzar regret ever underestimating them. The Krelzar's arrogance blinded them. They were certain that the humans had no chance. They underestimated the one thing that had kept humanity alive for centuries: their ability to adapt, to innovate, and to fight back when all seemed lost. Earth's leaders knew that time was running out. The Krelzar were growing bolder with every attack, and they knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire would send a final decisive blow. But the humans didn't panic. Instead, they worked quietly, behind the scenes, making preparations for a plan that would be revealed at the perfect moment. It wasn't a plan based on brute force. It was a plan based on surprise, a plan that would catch the Kralzar completely off guard. And so, as the Kralzar prepared for what they thought would be the final victory over humanity, they had no idea that they were walking straight into a trap. A trap set by a species they had considered weak, a species they thought they could easily destroy. But in their overconfidence, the Kralzar had made the biggest mistake of all. They had underestimated humanity. As the Kralzar Empire advanced on Earth, the humans' secret plan was beginning to take shape. To the outside world, it seemed like Earth had no chance of survival. Major cities were reduced to rubble, and their military forces were spread thin, constantly retreating in the face of the relentless Kralzar onslaught. People on Earth began to wonder if there was any hope left. But behind the scenes, a quiet revolution was brewing. The humans knew the Kralzar were getting too comfortable. They had launched their full offensive, believing that Earth's defenses were crumbling and that their victory was near. But the humans were not afraid. They had been preparing for this moment for decades, even though no one would have believed it possible. The Kralzar were wrong about humanity, and they were about to find that out the hard way. In secret, Earth's most brilliant minds, including scientists, engineers, and military strategists, had been working on a weapon of unimaginable power. A weapon that, when unleashed, could change the course of the war. It wasn't a traditional weapon like the Kralzar had anticipated, something that could be easily countered. Instead, it was something far more dangerous, a weapon of surprise, one that could make even the mightiest of empires falter. As Earth's leaders prepared to put their plan into action, the Kralzar continued their assault. They had no idea that their arrogance was about to cost them everything. Their fleet had destroyed most of Earth's major defense systems, but they had no idea that the humans had something else hidden in plain sight. They thought they were in control, but they were walking into a trap. The plan was simple but genius. While the Kralzar focused their attention on Earth's surface, the humans had secretly been building an underground network of advanced machines, hidden deep beneath the planet. These machines were part of a larger, highly classified project that had been set into motion years earlier, designed to create a counterattack that the Kralzar could never have predicted. The humans had developed technology that could manipulate gravity, disrupt communications, and even alter the trajectory of enemy warships. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a way to turn the tide of the entire war with a single, decisive strike. And the Kralzar had no idea it was coming. Earth's leaders knew they had to act quickly. The Kralzar were growing more confident by the day, and their forces were gathering for an all-out assault on Earth's capital. They thought they were about to deliver the final blow, but they hadn't accounted for one simple fact. The humans had been preparing for this moment from the start. At the heart of humanity's plan was an alliance of nations that had come together in a way never seen before. Every country, every person, had a role to play in the grand scheme of things. There was no room for hesitation. The Kralzar were about to discover that humanity was not the weak species they had assumed. They were about to see just how dangerous humans could be when pushed to their limits. The time for waiting was over. The humans had been patient, letting the Kralzar think they had the upper hand. But now, the final phase of the plan was set into motion. The Kralzar would soon realize that Earth had never been as weak as they thought. They were about to experience something they had never encountered before, a force more powerful than their weapons, more devastating than anything they could have imagined. As the Kralzar fleet prepared to make its final assault on Earth, the humans were ready. The trap was set. The Kralzar would soon be forced to confront the truth, that humanity, with all its flaws and imperfections, was not a species to be underestimated. The Empire's confidence was their greatest weakness, and the humans were about to turn that weakness into their greatest strength. In just a few hours, the course of the war would change forever. The Kralzar, in their overconfidence, had made a deadly mistake. They had underestimated the humans, and now they would pay the price. The countdown to the humans' counterattack had begun. Earth was no longer on the defensive. The Kralzar were about to face an unimaginable force, and nothing would be the same after today. The Empire had made its move, and now humanity was about to show them just how powerful they could be. As the final moments of peace before the storm approached, the humans were prepared to strike. They had waited long enough. The Kralzar were blind to what was about to happen, their confidence blinding them to the growing threat beneath their feet. The humans' plan was set, but they knew that timing was everything. The Kralzar had a massive fleet, but the humans had a secret weapon. Surprise! The Kralzar were busy consolidating their forces, preparing to launch their decisive strike against Earth's capital. They were confident that their overwhelming numbers and firepower would easily crush any resistance left. They thought the humans were broken, that their cities were in ruins, and that their military was in full retreat. What they didn't know was that this was exactly what the humans wanted them to think. In the deepest, most secure facilities on Earth, the final preparations were taking place. Engineers and scientists, once considered hopeless dreamers, were now the backbone of the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. They had developed something so incredible, so powerful, that it could completely disrupt the flow of the war. But they had only one chance to use it, and it had to be perfect. For years, they had secretly worked on a machine that could manipulate the gravity of any ship or structure. It was a technology far beyond what the Kralzar could comprehend. Earth's military leaders knew that the only way to turn the tide was to use this technology when the Kralzar fleet was at its closest, in the midst of their most powerful assault. The Kralzar would never see it coming. As the countdown to the Kralzar's final assault began, a wave of tension washed over the Earth. The entire planet was holding its breath, knowing that their survival depended on what was about to happen. In the command centers, there was no fear, only cold focus. Every human involved knew what was at stake. This was no longer just about defending Earth. It was about proving that humanity had the power to fight back against any enemy, no matter how powerful. The Kralzar fleet was in position. Their ships, each massive and heavily armed, hovered in space above Earth. Their commanders believed they were moments away from victory, and they were already celebrating in their minds. Their weapons were ready, their strategies in place, and their victory was almost certain. They couldn't understand why the humans had shown no resistance. It was almost as if they had given up. Little did they know, they were about to be hit with the most unexpected blow of their lives. As the Kralzar made their final approach to Earth's capital, the humans activated the gravity manipulation technology. It wasn't a flashy weapon, nor did it explode with a massive bang. Instead, it silently altered the gravitational fields around the Kralzar fleet, shifting their positions and sending their massive warships into a complete disarray. The Kralzar were caught off guard. Their ships, once moving in perfect formation, were now floating aimlessly in space. Some of the ships collided with each other, others veered wildly off course, and some even began to plummet toward Earth. The human gravity device had rendered their fleet helpless, and in a matter of minutes, the Kralzar had gone from the dominant force to disarrayed chaos. In the command center, the human leaders watched in stunned silence. The plan had worked. The Kralzar, who thought they could easily defeat humanity, had been thrown into confusion. The once mighty empire now found itself facing a disaster of its own making. The humans had given them no warning, no signs of resistance, and yet in an instant, everything had changed. The Kralzar commanders, now frantically trying to regain control, realized the full extent of their mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had assumed that their strength and numbers would crush Earth without any trouble. But they were wrong. Humanity had just proven that they could turn the tables in an instant. This wasn't just a military victory for Earth, it was a message. The Kralzar had thought they could bully humanity, crush their spirit, and take Earth without a fight. But now, the Empire was on the defensive, struggling to maintain control over its own fleet. The humans had shown them that they were far from weak. As the Kralzar fleet scrambled to regroup, the humans were already preparing for the next phase of their plan. The gravity manipulation technology had bought them precious time. But the war was far from over. Humanity had sent a clear message. They were not going to give up, not without a fight. And the Kralzar had no idea what was coming next. The Empire was reeling, but it wasn't done yet. It would regroup, it would try to retaliate, and it would make one last push to take Earth. But humanity was ready. They had just shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. The stage was set. The battle for Earth had taken a surprising turn, and now humanity was in control. But the Kralzar weren't finished. They would fight back. And that meant the next chapter of this war would be even more intense. The humans had made their move, but the Empire was coming for them. The real test was just beginning. The sudden disruption of the Kralzar fleet left the Empire in chaos. Their grand invasion plan, so carefully laid out, was now falling apart. The vast, powerful ships that were meant to dominate Earth's skies were drifting, disoriented, and powerless. It was a moment of shock. Their commanders scrambled, their voices filled with panic and disbelief as they tried to regain control. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't undo the damage caused by the humans' gravity manipulation technology. Back on Earth, the atmosphere in the command centers was electric. The unexpected success of their plan had given humanity an unprecedented advantage. For the first time in centuries, the Kralzar were not the ones in control. They were the ones reacting to the humans' actions. The tables had turned. However, this wasn't the time for celebration. Humanity knew that this victory, while significant, was only temporary. The Kralzar, if given time, would regroup and retaliate. The humans couldn't afford to get complacent. They had bought themselves some time, but that time needed to be used wisely. As Earth's military leaders convened, plans were already in motion for the next phase. They couldn't let the Kralzar reorganize and regain their strength. This was the moment to strike. And humanity, now fully aware of the Kralzar's weaknesses, was determined to make it count. The Kralzar, however, were far from defeated. The gravity manipulation had caused massive chaos, but it had not destroyed their fleet. Some ships were still intact, and the Empire's leaders were not about to give up. The Kralzar were determined to exact revenge. They quickly began making repairs to their damaged ships, but the delay had already put them on the defensive. They had lost their advantage, and now they were playing catch-up. In the midst of all this chaos, humanity's forces began to mobilize. The time had come for Earth's military to push forward and capitalize on the disarray in the Kralzar ranks. They knew that if they hesitated, the Empire would regroup and retaliate. The first wave of attacks was launched, and humanity's forces surged into space, confident and organized. As they engaged the Kralzar ships still in orbit, humanity's forces were relentless. They knew that this was their best chance to crush the Empire's grip on Earth once and for all. The Kralzar, still reeling from the gravity disruption, were slow to respond. They were in full retreat, struggling to protect their remaining fleet from humanity's precise, coordinated assault. The battle in space was fierce, but humanity was no longer fighting with desperation. They had confidence, and with that confidence came strategy. The Kralzar, who had once believed they were unstoppable, now found themselves cornered, unable to adapt quickly enough to the humans' moves. In the midst of this chaos, the true scope of humanity's resolve was revealed. It wasn't just the technology or the gravity manipulation that made the difference. It was the humans' refusal to give up. They fought with the determination of a species that had been through countless hardships and still refused to be broken. The Kralzar were witnessing firsthand the strength of humanity's will, and it terrified them. For the first time since the war began, the Kralzar commanders began to question everything. They had underestimated humanity at every turn, thinking they could crush the humans with ease. Now, they were facing the consequences of their arrogance. The Kralzar had made a terrible mistake, and as they scrambled to regain their footing, they realized that the humans were not only fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. With every passing moment, the Kralzar's grip on the galaxy weakened. Humanity's forces, once thought to be insignificant in the grand scheme of things, had become a formidable threat. The Empire had thought they could wipe out humanity easily, but now it was clear that they had underestimated their opponent. As the Kralzar fleet continued to falter, humanity's forces pressed forward with unrelenting precision. They knew this was their moment. The war that the Empire had initiated was far from over, but the humans had already proven that they were not to be underestimated. The Kralzar, realizing that they were losing, made one final attempt to regroup and launch a counteroffensive. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. Humanity had proven that they could fight back, and they weren't about to let the Empire take Earth without a fight. The battle for Earth's survival had become a battle for the future of the galaxy. As the Kralzar retreated, nursing their wounds, the humans took their first steps toward reclaiming their home. The Empire had made a colossal mistake, and the cost would be more than they could ever imagine. The war was far from over, but humanity's resolve was unbreakable. As the Kralzar retreated and regrouped, they could not ignore the reality that humanity was no longer the weak, helpless species they once thought they could easily crush. This sudden shift in power had left the Empire reeling. They had expected Earth to be just another target, another planet to conquer, but now the humans were no longer just defending. They were fighting back with everything they had, and they were not willing to stop until the last Kralzar had retreated or been destroyed. The retreat of the Kralzar fleet didn't last long. The Empire's high command was determined to take back control. They gathered their remaining forces and began to make repairs to the damaged ships. The Kralzar were proud, relentless warriors, but they had never anticipated humanity's resourcefulness. The humans had used their technological advantages with skill and cunning, and the Kralzar were paying the price for their underestimation. But despite their efforts to regroup, the Kralzar were no longer the only force in the galaxy. Humanity had proven that they could stand toe-to-toe with the Empire, and that fact had spread like wildfire. Every corner of the galaxy began to take notice. No longer would any species dare to underestimate the humans. They had shown they were capable of more than just surviving. They could conquer, they could outthink, and they could overcome the impossible. The humans were not resting on their laurels. As the Kralzar rebuilt their ships, Earth's military leaders pushed forward with relentless determination. They knew they couldn't afford to give the Empire time to reassert itself. Now that they had momentum, they needed to strike quickly and decisively. The window of opportunity was small, and they intended to make the most of it. With their fleets now mobilized, humanity launched another wave of attacks against the Kralzar. This time, the humans were more confident, more prepared. They knew their enemies' weaknesses, and they weren't about to let them escape so easily. Every move was calculated, every strategy executed with the precision of a species that had fought for survival time and time again. The Kralzar, on the other hand, were still struggling to recover from their previous defeat. The damage to their fleet had been far more significant than they had realized. As they tried to assemble a counterattack, they found that they lacked the numbers and the firepower to push back against the humans. Their once mighty fleet was fractured, and their commanders were beginning to question their own strategies. Despite their growing frustration, the Kralzar knew they couldn't afford to give up. They had initiated the war, and they couldn't back down now. But as each new wave of human attacks came, it became clearer that the Empire was not the unstoppable force they had once believed themselves to be. They had pushed humanity too far, and now the consequences of that decision were unfolding before their eyes. The humans were relentless. They attacked the Kralzar on every front, exploiting every weakness, capitalizing on every opportunity. The Kralzar had once believed they were superior to all other species in the galaxy, but the humans had shattered that illusion. The balance of power had shifted, and the Empire was losing control. The Kralzar began to make desperate moves, trying to consolidate their remaining forces and mount a counteroffensive, but it was too little, too late. The humans had taken the initiative, and they were determined to see it through. Every Kralzar ship that fell to the humans was a reminder of the mistake the Empire had made. Every ship that turned tail and fled was a symbol of their failure. Earth's military leaders, watching the tide of battle turn in their favor, knew that this was their moment. The Empire had underestimated them, and now the humans were making sure that everyone in the galaxy would know their strength. No longer would humanity be the subject of ridicule or scorn. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and it was a lesson that the Kralzar had paid a steep price for. As the Kralzar retreated yet again, the humans pressed forward, unwilling to let up. The war was far from over, but they had gained the upper hand. Humanity had proven that they were more than capable of standing up to the might of the Kralzar. And as they prepared for the final stages of the war, they knew that no other species in the galaxy would ever make the mistake of underestimating them again. The Empire's arrogance had been their undoing, and now the humans had a chance to rewrite the rules of the galaxy. No longer would they be seen as weak, as insignificant. They had shown that when pushed to the edge, they could rise up and fight with a strength that no one could predict. And as the battle raged on, one thing was certain. The Kralzar would never make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. As the war dragged on, the Kralzar Empire found itself on the brink of collapse. Their forces had been shattered, their morale broken, and yet they refused to surrender. The pride of the Kralzar was their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness. For centuries, they had been the galaxy's top power, their name synonymous with fear. Now they were fighting to hold on to that legacy, but the humans were relentless. Humanity had become a symbol of defiance and resilience. With each victory, the human forces gained more confidence, more supporters, and more allies. The Kralzar, once so sure of their dominance, now found themselves facing a reality they had never anticipated. They were no longer the feared conquerors, they were the ones on the defensive. The humans, meanwhile, were not slowing down. Their strategy had been simple but effective. Relentless attacks, outsmarting their enemies at every turn, and exploiting every weakness. Humanity's military had quickly adapted to the Kralzar tactics, learning from each engagement and using that knowledge to outmaneuver their opponents. They had been underestimated for too long, and now they had the chance to reshape the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The Kralzar High Command convened in secret, their thoughts heavy with the weight of their situation. They had made mistakes, massive ones, and now they had to face the consequences. The humans, with their unpredictable nature and newfound strength, had caught the Kralzar off guard at every step. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now the humans were pushing forward with a vengeance. But it wasn't just the humans they had to worry about. As word of the Kralzar's struggle spread, other species in the galaxy began to take notice. Some of them, long kept in check by the Empire's rule, began to see an opportunity for themselves, and they were watching humanity closely. If humanity could defeat the Kralzar, what could they do to other powers in the galaxy? The stage was set for a dramatic shift in the galactic order, and the Kralzar were running out of time to prevent it. The humans, however, were not only focused on their war with the Kralzar. Their military forces were spreading through the galaxy, gaining support from those who had suffered under the Empire's tyranny. There was a growing movement of rebellion and alliance, and humanity was at its center. The Kralzar were no longer the galaxy's unchallenged rulers. They were struggling to maintain control of their own territory, and their enemies were closing in on all sides. As the Kralzar regrouped, they prepared for a final, desperate assault. They had no choice but to use their most powerful weapon, their fleet's ultimate warship. It was a massive, heavily armed vessel capable of obliterating entire planets. The Kralzar believed that this would be their last chance to strike back, to prove that they were still the Empire to be feared. They were hoping that one final show of strength would scare humanity into submission. But the humans were ready. They had anticipated this move. They knew that the Kralzar would stop at nothing to try to reclaim their position. And they had a plan. As the Kralzar prepared to launch their final attack, Humanity was already in position to counter it. The warship they had built in secret, their own crowning achievement, was now ready for battle. Humanity wasn't just reacting to the Kralzar's moves. They were dictating the terms of the war. The stage was set for the final showdown. Humanity, once considered the underdog, was now in control. The Kralzar's pride, their arrogance, had cost them dearly. They had underestimated the human spirit, the human will to survive. And now they were facing a force they had no way of countering. As the final battle approached, the fate of the galaxy seemed to hang in the balance. Could the Kralzar win back their throne, or would humanity claim its place at the top of the galactic hierarchy? The Empire had already lost so much, but they refused to give up without a fight. They would either die trying to reclaim their power, or they would go down in history as the empire that could not withstand the rise of humanity. The next move would be humanity's, and with it, the galaxy would change forever. The final battle was upon them. The Kralzar Empire, desperate to retain their dominance, had deployed their ultimate weapon, a colossal warship, a symbol of their once unmatched power. The ship was capable of wiping entire fleets off the map with a single shot, a terrifying force that could turn the tide of the war in an instant. The Kralzar were betting everything on this vessel, their last hope of crushing humanity once and for all. On the other side, humanity had prepared for this moment for years. The humans had studied the Kralzar's war tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. They knew that the Kralzar's reliance on their warship would be their downfall. Humanity had built their own secret weapon, a ship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was fast, stealthy, and brimming with technology that even the Kralzar had never encountered before. It was humanity's ace in the hole, and they were ready to use it. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Kralzar fleet surged forward, their warship leading the charge. The massive ship unleashed a barrage of deadly firepower, targeting the human fleet with relentless precision. But humanity was ready. Their ships moved swiftly, dodging the Kralzar's fire, their pilots skillfully navigating through the chaos of space. The Kralzar were used to overpowering their enemies with sheer force, but this time, they faced something different. Humanity didn't fight like the others. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and relentless. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, the human fleet launched their secret weapon. The ship, once hidden in the depths of a distant asteroid belt, emerged from the shadows. It was smaller than the Kralzar warship, but it was faster, more agile, and far deadlier. With a sudden burst of speed, the human ship darted toward the Kralzar vessel, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. The Kralzar attempted to fire their devastating weapon, but it was too late. The human ship had already outmaneuvered them, dodging the blast with ease. The humans didn't stop there. They launched a coordinated strike, using their advanced technology to disable the Kralzar's warship systems. Within minutes, the once mighty ship was crippled, its weapons and shields useless. The Kralzar fleet was thrown into disarray as their flagship fell. The humans, knowing this was their moment, pressed forward with everything they had. The Kralzar, realizing their defeat, tried to retreat, but it was too late. Humanity's final attack came swift and brutal. The Kralzar ships, once proud and powerful, were no match for the fury of the human fleet. The war that had seemed so unwinnable for humanity just months before was now drawing to a close. The Kralzar, the galaxy's most feared empire, had been beaten, not by superior firepower, but by the ingenuity, determination, and spirit of humanity. As the Kralzar fleet scattered, their once imposing flagship now a smoldering wreck, the humans stood victorious. The war was over. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Kralzar, who had once believed they were untouchable, were now a defeated empire, their power shattered by a species they had dismissed as nothing more than primitive beings. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. They had faced impossible odds and had emerged victorious. No longer the underdogs, the humans had proven that they could overcome any challenge, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. The galaxy, once ruled by the Kralzar, was now in the hands of those who had dared to fight for their place in it. The Kralzar Empire would never be the same. Their once great power had crumbled, and in its place stood a new power, humanity. A power that no species would ever dare challenge again. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate humanity. They had faced the impossible, and they had won. The rise of humanity had begun, and nothing could stop it. The stars above seemed like cold, distant fireflies, scattered across the dark expanse of space. For over a century, the Deathworlders' home planet had been under the constant shadow of an alien siege. The invaders, a ruthless empire from the far reaches of the galaxy, had set their sights on the Deathworlders' rich resources, and they would not stop until the planet was theirs. But the Deathworlders were not like other species. They had survived the harshest of environments, fought against the most dangerous beasts, and now they were fighting for their survival against an enemy far superior in technology and numbers. The alien fleet, a massive and terrifying force, had surrounded the planet, cutting off all trade routes and communications. They thought it would be a matter of time before the Deathworlders would surrender, bowing before the might of the Empire. But there was one thing they didn't understand. The Deathworlders never gave up. On the planet's surface, life continued as it always had. The cities were bustling, the farmers worked in the fields, and the children played in the streets. Life had a sense of normalcy, despite the constant threat above. But deep within the government's command centers, the truth was clear. The aliens would not stop until the Deathworlders were crushed. The Empire's forces had already wiped out several neighboring systems, and their advances showed no signs of slowing down. Their fleets were equipped with the most advanced weaponry, and their soldiers were trained for ruthless efficiency. For a century, they had maintained the siege, bombarding the planet's defenses with relentless attacks. Yet the Deathworlders had withstood it all, refusing to let their world fall. The siege was long and painful, but it was not over. In the heart of the capital city, high above in the command towers, General Kelder stood by the large observation window, watching the distant flashes of battle in the sky. He was an old man now, his hair streaked with gray, his face worn from years of war. The endless struggle had taken its toll, but he still had fire in his heart. The alien invaders had underestimated the Deathworlders, thinking they would be easy prey. But the Deathworlders were survivors, and survival was in their blood. Calder's eyes narrowed as he watched the alien fleet regrouping, preparing for their next assault. He had been in the war since the beginning, watching as his people fought bravely, always holding their ground. He knew they were close to the breaking point, but he also knew something the aliens did not. The Deathworlders had a secret weapon, a weapon that was about to make all the difference. Down below, in the barracks, the young Deathworlder cadets were preparing for their first mission. They were a new generation of warriors, trained in the harshest environments the galaxy had to offer. Their bodies were tough, their minds sharp, and they had one goal in mind: to defend their home. The Empire had destroyed entire fleets, taken planets, and slaughtered millions, but the cadets had something the aliens didn't: fearless determination. They had been prepared for this moment their entire lives. These cadets were not just soldiers. They were the future of their people, the ones who would end the century-long siege and free their planet from the aliens. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to face the challenge of their lives. They would be up against a powerful, well-trained enemy, but they had something that the Empire never counted on: the ability to think outside the box, to adapt and survive in the face of overwhelming odds. As the cadets assembled in the training rooms, their instructors gave them one last briefing. "Remember," said Captain Riva, the commander of the cadet battalion, "you are not just fighting for yourselves. You are fighting for your families, for your planet, and for the future of the Deathworlders. You may be young, but you are the strongest fighters the galaxy has ever seen. Do not let the Empire break you." The cadets nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew what was at stake. Their people had lived under the Empire's siege for far too long, and they were ready to end it. They had trained their whole lives for this moment. Now, it was time to show the galaxy what the Deathworlders were truly capable of. Kaldor stood in the command center, watching as the cadets prepared to board their ships. He could feel the weight of history on their shoulders. The fate of the planet rested in their hands. But as he looked at their young faces, he saw something else. Hope. Hope that, for the first time in a century, they could end this war. The cadets took their positions, ready to launch into space. The command center buzzed with activity as the fleet was readied for battle. Kaldor turned to his officers and said, "It's time. Launch the fleet." The battle for their home was about to begin. As the cadet fleet soared into the sky, the aliens watching from their ships were preparing for what they thought would be a routine battle. They didn't know it yet, but this time, the Deathworlders were not going to hold back. The siege was ending today. The fleet flew into the heart of the alien forces. The aliens were expecting a drawn-out fight, a battle that would last for hours, maybe even days. But the cadets had a different plan. They had been taught to think fast, strike hard, and never give up. They didn't have the luxury of time, and they didn't intend to waste it. As the first cadet ships entered the fray, they were like a swarm of deadly insects, darting in and out of the alien ships. The Empire was unprepared for the speed and precision of the Deathworlder cadets. Every move they made was calculated, every strike precise. The alien forces were already starting to panic. The battle had begun, and the aliens were in for a rude awakening. They thought they had the upper hand, but they didn't know who they were fighting. They didn't know they were up against a new generation of warriors who were about to change everything. The ancient siege that had lasted a century was about to end in the most unexpected way. The Deathworlders had been underestimated, and now the Empire would face the consequences of their mistake. The tide of battle was turning, and it was only a matter of time before the cadets would end the siege once and for all. The Deathworlder cadet fleet moved swiftly through the endless darkness of space, their ships cutting through the void with purpose. Inside, the cadets were focused, their eyes sharp and minds honed to perfection. They had trained for this day, learned every trick, every tactic to survive in the harshest conditions, and now, with the fate of their planet on their shoulders, they were ready. Their mission was clear: end the century-long siege in one strike, destroy the Empire's hold on their world, and show the galaxy the true strength of the Deathworlders. Captain Riva, who had been guiding these cadets since their first days in training, stood at the front of the command bridge of the lid ship. Her face was calm, but inside, her heart beat with the fire of 1,000 battles. She had seen too many battles lost, too many lives sacrificed for the sake of a slow war of attrition. But this time was different. She had seen these cadets grow, learn, and become warriors unlike any others. "Remember," Captain Riva said, speaking to her young crew as the first wave of ships lined up behind hers, "the Empire expects us to fall into their trap. They'll try to break our lines, overpower us with their firepower, and drag this into a battle of endurance. But we won't fight that way. We'll hit them fast, hit them hard, and leave them wondering what hit them." The cadets nodded in unison. They knew what had to be done. Time was their enemy, and they could not afford to drag this fight out any longer. They had to show the Empire that the Deathworlders were more than just survivors. They were conquerors, fighters that could turn the tide of war in an instant. "Prepare for immediate engagement," Captain Riva ordered. "This will be the fastest, most brutal assault the Empire has ever seen. We are not waiting for reinforcements. We are not waiting for backup. We will take the Empire's fleet apart piece by piece." The young cadets, their faces set with grim determination, went to their stations, each one fully aware of the importance of the task ahead. There was no room for mistakes. They had been trained to think on their feet, to outmaneuver enemies much stronger than themselves, to act before their opponents even realized what was happening. They were about to put everything they had learned to the test. The cadet ships flew toward the alien fleet with incredible speed. Their movements were synchronized, as if they were one mind controlling hundreds of ships. They knew their mission: break the Empire's formation, destroy their command ships, and dismantle the entire siege in less than 20 minutes. It was an impossible task, one that had never been done before. But the Deathworlders weren't here to do what had been done before. They were here to rewrite the rules. As the cadets approached the alien fleet, their ships dropped into an unanticipated formation. The Empire's ships were used to facing traditional assaults. Slow, methodical advances, overwhelming firepower. But the Deathworlders had learned from their mistakes, studied every flaw in the Empire's tactics. They knew how to get in close without being detected, how to slip past enemy lines without triggering alarms, how to outmaneuver and confuse an army that thought it was unbeatable. The first alien ship exploded in a flash of light, caught off guard by the unexpected attack. The Empire's forces scrambled to respond. But by then, the Deathworlders were already everywhere. Small, agile ships darted in and out of the larger alien craft, slipping through cracks in the defenses. They aimed for weak spots, areas where the Empire had failed to reinforce their vessels properly. At the same time, the larger Deathworlder ships moved in close, using their heavy weaponry to break apart the Empire's formation, leaving their enemies in disarray. The alien fleet had been expecting a battle, but this was no ordinary fight. The cadets weren't following the Empire's rules. They were rewriting them. The Empire's commanders were stunned. They had assumed that with their overwhelming numbers, the Deathworlders would fold under pressure. But here they were, outnumbered, outgunned. And still, they were pushing the Empire back. The Empire's grand plan was falling apart, piece by piece, and no one knew how to stop it. Inside the Deathworlder command ship, Captain Riva observed the chaos with a quiet smile. The battle was progressing even faster than she had hoped. The Empire had fallen into the trap, their pride blinding them to the Deathworlders' true potential. "We've got them on the ropes," Captain Riva said to her crew, her voice steady and commanding. "Keep up the pressure. We break their command structure next. Once their leadership crumbles, the rest will fall apart." As the cadet ships tore through the enemy lines, Captain Riva's mind was focused on one goal: to cripple the Empire's ability to lead, to command, to fight back. The sooner their leaders were taken out, the sooner the Empire would realize that it had underestimated the Deathworlders. That no matter how many ships they had, no matter how much firepower they controlled, they could never defeat a species that fought not just for victory, but for their very survival. The first of the alien command ships fell under the Deathworlders' relentless assault. The explosion lit up the battlefield like a second sun, casting long shadows across the black expanse of space. The Deathworlders had struck their first victory in this fast-paced battle, and it was only the beginning. "Phase 2 is a go," Captain Riva declared. "Now we hit them where it hurts, take out their fleet's backbone, and the rest will crumble." As the Deathworlders moved deeper into the heart of the Empire's forces, they could feel the momentum shifting. The once feared alien fleet was now in chaos, struggling to keep up with the relentless speed and ferocity of the cadets. And with every explosion, every fallen ship, the Empire's grip on the galaxy weakened. The siege that had lasted a century was now teetering on the brink of collapse, all because of the audacious, unexpected tactics of the Deathworlder cadets. The Empire had never imagined they would face such a response, and now, it was too late to stop the tide of battle from turning in the Deathworlders' favor. The Empire's arrogance had led to its downfall, and in just 20 minutes, the cadets would show the galaxy the true power of the Deathworlders, a species that never gave up, never surrendered, and always fought until the very end. The battlefield was chaos. Space had always been a vast and empty expanse, but now, it felt like the very air was thick with destruction. Every explosion, every burst of firepower, left its mark on the cold expanse of the void. The Empire's once dominant fleet was crumbling under the relentless assault of the Deathworlder cadets. The cadets, driven by training, fury, and the will to survive, knew the Empire's hold on their world would end here. The siege had lasted a century, but it would not last another day. The lead ship, the flagship of the cadet fleet, cut through the destruction like a knife. Captain Riva stood tall, her eyes never leaving the chaotic battlefield unfolding before her. Behind her, the command bridge was a flurry of activity. The cadets were in perfect sync, each one performing their tasks with precision and confidence. The Empire's forces were scrambling. Their superior firepower, their advanced technology, had been nothing against the relentless onslaught of the Deathworlder cadets. The Empire's warships, designed for strength and dominance, were now reduced to floating debris, their armor and shields no match for the cadets' agile and unpredictable tactics. "We've broken through their first line," Lieutenant Darnell reported from the tactical station. His voice was calm, but the pride in his eyes was undeniable. "We're almost through the next wave. They're not regrouping. They're panicking." "Good," Captain Riva said, her voice low and determined. "Keep the pressure on. They won't know what hit them." The strategy was simple, but devastating. The cadets had struck fast and hard, taking the Empire by surprise. Their ships, small and nimble, had darted in and out of the larger enemy vessels, striking at weak points, tearing apart shields, and causing chaos in the Empire's ranks. It was a hit-and-run tactic that left the enemy forces confused, unable to respond effectively. The cadet ships didn't just attack. They overwhelmed. Each strike felt like 100. Each hit was another layer of pressure. The Empire had expected to defeat the Deathworlders, slowly grinding them down over time. But the cadets had a different plan. They weren't here to drag out the fight. They were here to end it. As the battle continued, the cadet fleet struck again and again, ripping apart the Empire's defenses with terrifying speed. The Empire's strategy of holding the line with brute force had failed. Now, there was only disorder. On the outer edge of the battlefield, another massive explosion lit up the void. A flagship of the Empire, the largest ship in their fleet, was reduced to nothing but debris. Its shields had failed, and its core had been breached. The cadets had targeted its weak points with surgical precision, striking in places no one had thought to strike. "Another one down," Lieutenant Darnell said, almost with disbelief. Their flagship, gone. Captain Riva's gaze remained focused on the battlefield. She wasn't celebrating just yet. They still had work to do. But the destruction was undeniable. The Empire's greatest strength had been shattered. And now, the Deathworlders had complete control of the battlefield. "We're about to hit their command ships," Riva said, her voice steady. "Once they fall, the rest will scatter." It was the heart of the plan. The Empire had relied on centralized command to coordinate their forces, trusting that their generals and admirals would be able to organize their fleets no matter what happened. But the Deathworlders knew better. By taking out the leadership, they would cause the entire Empire to lose cohesion, unraveling the siege in a matter of minutes. The cadet ships sped toward the heart of the Empire's formation, where the command vessels hovered in a seemingly unbreakable formation. But the Deathworlders had already identified their weak spots. The cadet fleet swarmed the command ships, bypassing their defenses with the skill and ferocity that only Deathworlders possessed. Explosions erupted from every direction as the cadets fired their weapons with deadly precision. The Empire's command ships, once thought invincible, were now crumbling under the barrage. And still, the cadets pressed on, relentless in their pursuit. The last of the command ships exploded in a brilliant burst of fire, sending shockwaves through the remaining Empire vessels. The loss of their leaders had thrown the Empire's forces into complete disarray. Without guidance, without a plan, they were like a ship adrift in a storm. They were no longer a cohesive fighting force. They were a broken, scattered mass of ships, fighting only for survival. And that was when it happened. The last remnants of the Empire's fleet, those ships that had once believed they could crush the Deathworlders without a second thought, began to turn and flee. It was a sight Captain Riva had longed to see, but now that it was happening, she felt no joy. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Empire had been humiliated. Their century-long siege had been undone in the blink of an eye. Their forces had been shattered, and their pride had been crushed. Phase 1 complete, Captain Riva said, as her voice echoed through the command room. But this isn't over yet. Let's finish this. The Empire had underestimated the Deathworlders. They had thought the cadets would be no match for their overwhelming strength. But the Deathworlders weren't just survivors, they were fighters. And the galaxy had just learned that no one could stand against them. The siege had been broken in under 20 minutes, and the Empire would never forget the lesson they had learned that day. The final push had begun. The once mighty Empire, which had taken over countless worlds with its advanced technology and brutal force, was now on the edge of annihilation. Its centuries-old siege had crumbled within 20 minutes, a shockwave of destruction that echoed across the galaxy. The remaining enemy ships, once filled with confidence and pride, were now turning tail and running. But even as the Empire's forces scattered, the Deathworlder cadets pressed on, determined to complete their mission. In the heart of the cadet fleet, Captain Riva stood at the helm of her flagship, her sharp eyes scanning the broken battlefield. The fire of battle still blazed in the distance, but it was fading. The Empire's resistance was weak, their command structure shattered beyond repair. The Deathworlders had done what no one thought possible. They had completely dismantled the Empire's century-long siege in under 20 minutes. "We've got them on the run," Lieutenant Darnell said, his voice a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "Their fleet is scattering in every direction." "Don't celebrate yet," Captain Riva responded coolly. "The Empire's forces may be retreating, but we need to make sure they never return. We finish this today." There was no time to relax. The Empire's surviving ships, though in disarray, were still dangerous. Their remaining forces had begun to scatter across the sector, hoping to regroup and lick their wounds. The cadets couldn't afford to let them slip away and rebuild. They had to finish what they'd started, end the siege, and ensure the Empire never threatened them again. Riva gave the order, and the fleet surged forward. The cadets had a job to do, and it wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about sending a message that would echo through the galaxy for generations. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity had turned the tide, and no one would dare underestimate them again. The cadet ships darted across the battlefield, their smaller, faster designs allowing them to outmaneuver the fleeing Empire vessels. Each ship struck swiftly and decisively. The Empire had no time to react. Their surviving ships, already damaged and disorganized, were easy prey for the cadets' relentless assault. "We're closing in on their last stronghold," Lieutenant Darnell reported. "The rest of their ships are scattering. They're done." Riva nodded, but she remained focused. "Not yet. We still have work to do." It wasn't just about defeating the Empire's fleet. It was about completely destroying their ability to recover. The cadets targeted the Empire's remaining strongholds, space stations, command posts, and logistical hubs that could have served as a lifeline for the retreating fleet. The Empire had once believed it could maintain control over the galaxy by overwhelming its enemies with sheer force. But now, it was all coming apart, piece by piece. As the cadets cut down the Empire's last defenses, the remaining fleet commanders began to panic. Communications between their ships grew erratic. Officers shouted orders, but their voices were drowned out by the sound of explosions and alarms. The Empire had once been unstoppable, but now they were nothing more than a broken and disjointed force, unable to even communicate with one another effectively. The sight of the Empire's downfall was almost surreal to Captain Riva. For years, the galaxy had watched as the Empire's strength grew, as their reach extended to every corner of space. Now, in a matter of hours, they were watching it all unravel. The cadets had done the impossible, and they had done it in record time. It was a victory that would be remembered forever. But for Riva, there was no time for celebration. She was a soldier, and the war was not yet won. She had seen how quickly the tides of battle could turn, how one mistake could cost everything. The cadets' mission was clear. They needed to ensure the Empire never threatened them again. "We've done enough damage," Riva said, turning to Lieutenant Darnell. "But there's one last thing to do. We need to send them a message that will echo across the galaxy." The fleet moved swiftly, heading toward the heart of the Empire's remaining power, their final stronghold, a massive space station that had once served as a hub for the Empire's forces, was all that remained. If they destroyed it, the Empire would have no way to rebuild, no way to regroup, no way to challenge the Deathworlders again. Captain Riva's ship led the charge. The Deathworlder fleet gathered around it, forming a tight formation that would leave no room for escape for the enemy. The space station was massive, its size almost intimidating, but the cadets weren't afraid. They knew exactly what needed to be done. "Lock on all weapons," Riva commanded. "Target their core. We end this now." The final assault began. The cadet ships unleashed their firepower in a synchronized attack that tore into the station's defenses. The Empire's surviving ships attempted to provide cover, but it was too late. The cadets were faster, more agile, and far more determined. Explosions rocked the station as the cadets' weapons found their marks. The Empire's last stronghold began to crumble. As the station's core ignited, sending shockwaves through the space around it, the remaining Empire vessels made a last-ditch effort to escape. But it was futile. The station's destruction marked the end of the Empire's century-long siege. As the dust settled, the Deathworlder fleet stood victorious. The Empire was defeated, and their siege was no more. But even in victory, Captain Riva remained focused. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that day. The Deathworlders were not to be underestimated, and the Empire had just learned that lesson the hard way. "Mission complete," Riva said, her voice calm but resolute. "Let's head home." The Deathworlders had proven that they could accomplish the impossible. In 20 minutes, they had turned the tide of a century-old war and sent a message to the galaxy that would not be forgotten. No one would ever again question the strength and resolve of humanity. The destruction of the Empire's last stronghold sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The once feared Empire, which had taken a century to establish dominance, was wiped out in a matter of minutes. The galactic community, who had once bowed before the Empire's might, now stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of the events that had unfolded. The Deathworlders, humanity's finest warriors, had rewritten the rules of war in a way no one thought possible. Across the galaxy, news spread like wildfire. The word impossible was on everyone's lips. How could a group of cadets, mere trainees, have taken down an empire that had held the galaxy in its grip for so long? How could they have ended a siege that had lasted over 100 years in the span of just 20 minutes? For the first time in a long while, the galaxy's major factions were forced to reckon with a new and terrifying reality. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The Deathworlders had proven their might, and the consequences of underestimating them were now clear. As the last remnants of the Empire's forces scattered, the galaxy watched as humanity's cadets returned home. Their fleet was battered but triumphant. Captain Riva, the leader of the cadet fleet, was hailed as a hero by her comrades, but she knew that their work was far from over. There was still a long road ahead. While the Empire had been defeated, the galaxy was still full of threats, and humanity had to be prepared for whatever came next. Despite the victory, Captain Riva felt the weight of the responsibility that came with it. The galaxy had witnessed the Deathworlders' power, but they had also witnessed their mercy. Humanity could have obliterated the remnants of the Empire, wiped them from existence, but instead they had allowed them to escape with their lives. It was a decision that weighed heavily on Riva's mind. "I hope we made the right choice," she muttered to herself, standing on the deck of her flagship, staring out at the stars. "But I have to believe we did." Lieutenant Darnell, who had been by her side throughout the battle, stepped up beside her. "We did what we had to, Captain. The galaxy is never going to forget this. No one will ever challenge us again." Riva nodded but didn't say anything. The truth was, she didn't know what the future held. She knew humanity's reputation had changed overnight, but with that newfound power came new responsibilities. The Deathworlders weren't just a force of destruction. They were now a beacon of hope for the galaxy's oppressed species, and that wasn't a responsibility she took lightly. Back on Earth, news of the victory spread just as rapidly. People cheered, their voices echoing in the streets as they celebrated their heroes. But there was something else in the air, a sense of uncertainty. The galaxy had just witnessed humanity's wrath, but there were other forces out there, and they were watching closely. The Deathworlders had sent a clear message. Never again would humanity be silenced. But as the celebrations died down, questions began to emerge. Would humanity be able to maintain this power? Could they protect the galaxy from future threats? And perhaps most importantly, how long before the next empire rose to challenge them? The galaxy's political landscape had shifted, and the balance of power was now in flux. The great empires that once dominated the stars now had to contend with humanity's might. The galaxy's alliances were shaken, and everyone was forced to reconsider their positions. No one knew who would rise next. But one thing was certain: no species would risk entering humanity again. In the days following the battle, Captain Riva and her crew were invited to a council meeting with the leaders of various galactic factions. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy were present, their eyes fixed on humanity with a mix of fear, admiration, and caution. "We have all witnessed your victory," the leader of the Xanthi Empire began, his voice cold and calculating. "But tell me, Captain Riva, what is it that you want from us? Your victory has made you the most powerful force in the galaxy. What are you going to do with that power?" Riva stood tall, her eyes scanning the room. "We're not here to conquer," she said firmly. "We're here to protect. The days of empires terrorizing innocent species are over. But make no mistake, we will defend ourselves, and we will defend those who cannot defend themselves. Humanity will not be a tool for your ambitions." There was a long silence in the room, as the representatives exchanged uneasy glances. They had never faced anything like this before. The Deathworlders had proven themselves, and the galaxy was left to decide how to respond to this new reality. As the council session drew to a close, Captain Riva left the room with her crew. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. Humanity had made a statement, but the true challenge was just beginning. They had shown the galaxy their strength, but it was how they wielded that strength that would define their future. As the cadet fleet prepared to head back to Earth, Captain Riva felt a strange sense of unease. They had won, but the galaxy had changed in ways no one could fully comprehend. It was a new era, one where humanity was no longer the underdog, and that terrified her in ways she couldn't explain. But for now, all she could do was look ahead. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but would that fear lead to respect? Or would it spiral into something darker? Only time would tell. The galaxy was a place of constant change, and with the fall of the Empire, it was clear that everything was shifting. The death of a once mighty force sent ripples through the cosmos, leaving behind a void that would inevitably be filled. Humanity, the Deathworlders, had proven their power, but now they were faced with the aftermath, the rebuilding of a galaxy that was never truly united to begin with. Across the galaxy, factions watched the human victory with a mix of awe and fear. While some saw it as an opportunity to align with the new dominant power, others looked for ways to challenge humanity's newfound supremacy. As much as the galaxy had changed, old wounds and rivalries still festered beneath the surface. Back on Earth, Captain Riva stood in a secure briefing room, surrounded by her most trusted commanders. Their victory over the Empire had made waves, and it wasn't just the other species who were concerned. Humanity had become a superpower in the galaxy, and with that came enormous responsibility. The Earth's government was under increasing pressure to make a decision. What role would humanity play in the future of the galaxy? Would they act as an empire themselves, conquering and imposing their will on others, or would they follow a different path? "Captain, the leaders are asking for a decision," Lieutenant Darnell said, his voice tense. "We can't keep stalling. The galaxy is waiting to see what we do next." Riga rubbed her temples, trying to process everything. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, and she knew that the next move would define humanity's place in the stars. "We can't just become another empire," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "We're not the same as the empire we just destroyed. We fight for something different." Darnell nodded, but the concern was clear in his eyes. "But the galaxy won't see it that way. They see strength, and they see a potential threat." Captain Riva turned to the viewscreen in front of her, watching as the distant stars flickered in the void. "We'll have to show them. We'll form new alliances, real alliances, and we'll help those who can't defend themselves." The council meeting was set, and the future of humanity's galactic involvement would be decided in that room. As the fleet prepared to make its way to the council chamber, Riva couldn't shake the sense that the meeting wasn't just about peace, it was about power, and power had its price. As the council convened, representatives from various galactic factions took their seats. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Many had already begun forming their opinions about humanity's role in the galaxy. Some, like the leaders of the Xanthi Empire, had already begun courting humanity, eager to secure their place by their side. Others, particularly the smaller oppressed species, watched with cautious optimism, hoping humanity would offer them protection from larger, more oppressive powers. "We are here today because the galaxy has witnessed something extraordinary," the High Chancellor of the Rarath Coalition began, his voice steady, but filled with underlying tension. "The Deathworlders, humanity, have proven themselves to be the strongest force in the galaxy. But strength alone does not guarantee peace." The room was silent. Every representative was waiting to hear how humanity would respond. Captain Riva stood, her posture confident, yet her mind raced. The time had come to make her case. She wasn't just representing humanity's military might. She was representing a new vision for the future, one where the galaxy could find peace even in the face of overwhelming power. "We are not here to dominate," Riva began, her voice cutting through the room. "We are here to protect. The galaxy has suffered under the rule of empires, the kind that have been built on fear and oppression. Humanity has seen what such power does. We refuse to walk that path." A murmur rippled through the room. Some were skeptical, others were curious. This wasn't the speech they expected from humanity's leaders. "The empire we destroyed," she continued, "it was a regime built on control. We could have wiped them out completely, left nothing behind. But we chose not to. We showed mercy because we believe in the future. In a galaxy where species don't fear one another, where alliances are built on respect, not subjugation." Her words hung in the air, and the council members exchanged uncertain glances. Many of them had heard the whispers about humanity's growing power, but now they were hearing it directly from the source. "We are not your enemies," Riva concluded. "We are humanity. We have stood up to the most dangerous force the galaxy has ever seen, and we did it not with cruelty, but with strength and honor. This is who we are, and this is who we will be. If you are willing to stand with us, we will fight for peace. If not, we will protect ourselves, and anyone who threatens the peace of this galaxy." The room fell silent. There was no immediate applause or cheers, but something shifted in the atmosphere. The other species had seen the Deathworlders' might and their mercy. It was clear that humanity had proven itself, not just as conquerors, but as a force for something greater. "We will consider your offer," the High Chancellor said after a long pause. "But understand this, the galaxy does not change overnight." Riva nodded. "No, it doesn't. But we're willing to fight for that change, no matter how long it takes." As the council session ended, Captain Riva felt a sense of quiet relief. The decision hadn't been made yet, but humanity's message had been sent. The future was uncertain, but humanity had proven that it was ready to shape it on its own terms. The galaxy now knew that no species would ever risk injuring humanity again. And with that knowledge came a new kind of peace, one forged in the fires of battle and the strength of resolve. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but the true test was yet to come. Would they respect humanity as an ally, or would they continue to see them as a threat? Only time would tell. The stars shimmered across the void, and the once fractured galaxy now found itself at the crossroads of a new era. The council meeting had been only the beginning, a first step in what would surely become a much longer journey. Humanity had spoken, and for the first time in galactic history, its voice echoed with the power of truth and the weight of victory. But the road ahead was not an easy one. Captain Riva stood on the balcony of the command center aboard the human flagship, the Valor's Heart, looking out into the dark expanse of space. The fleet had returned to Earth, but the real battles were just beginning. The galaxy, despite what many might think, was not a place of peace. It was a place where alliances were fragile, where betrayal was common, and where strength was the only language that truly spoke. The other species had listened to humanity's promise of peace, but there were still those who doubted. They believed humanity's strength would make them oppressive conquerors. They feared that humanity would take what they wanted and crush anyone who opposed them. But Captain Riva knew better. Humanity had shown mercy in the face of absolute power. They had proven that they could destroy, yes, but they also had the strength to build something greater than empires. And with that power came responsibility, a responsibility they would not take lightly. They had learned from the past, from the mistakes of the ancient empires that had ravaged the galaxy. Humanity's future would be one of protection and honor, not domination. As Riva pondered this, the voice of Lieutenant Darnell broke through her thoughts. "Captain, you might want to see this," he said, his tone urgent. "The new alliance proposals are coming in." The council members, in their own way, had begun to respond to humanity's message. Some had already sent representatives to Earth, eager to formalize alliances with the new galactic power. Others, less certain, had sent envoys with requests for meetings, curious to see if humanity's promises could be trusted. Riva turned and followed Darnell into the command room, where a holographic map of the galaxy was projected above the table. The different species and their territories were marked with various colors, signifying their allegiance or neutrality. Some were already in agreement with humanity, while others remained unsure. "The Zoriths have already pledged their loyalty," Darnell said, pointing to a glowing blue sector. "And the Verklins are asking for a mutual defense pact. But there are others, many more, who are still hesitant. They're watching us, waiting to see if we'll hold to our promises." Riva examined the map closely. She knew that the next step was crucial. Humanity had to prove that it wasn't just strong, it was trustworthy. The galaxy was full of warriors and conquerors, but it lacked true leaders who could unite its many species under a banner of peace. "We'll start with the Verklins," she said, her voice firm. "They're an ancient species, honorable in their own right. If we can earn their trust, others will follow." The next few weeks were filled with diplomatic talks, the weight of humanity's promises hanging heavy in every negotiation. Riva and her team worked tirelessly, carefully balancing the need for military strength with the desire for lasting peace. They sent emissaries to distant worlds, met with leaders, and made it clear that humanity would not be the cause of more bloodshed unless absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy watched with bated breath. The question that everyone asked was simple: would humanity live up to its promises, or would they become just another empire, ruling with an iron fist? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. The first true test came when the small, isolated planet of Talvri Prime was attacked by a raiding fleet from a rogue faction of the Dominion. Talvri Prime was known for its peaceful farming communities and had no real defenses to speak of. Its people were weak, defenseless. When the Dominion's ships descended on the planet, it seemed as though the end was inevitable. But humanity had made a promise. Within hours of receiving the distress call, the Valor's heart was en route, with a fleet of human warships in tow. Captain Riven knew that this was the moment to prove humanity's true character. They could have simply wiped out the rogue faction in a show of power, but that wasn't the plan. Instead, they sent a message. Humanity would protect the helpless. The battle was fierce. The Dominion raiders had no idea what was coming for them. As the human fleet arrived in orbit around Talvri Prime, they unleashed a full-scale assault, not to destroy the raiders, but to disable them. The human ships deployed their advanced technology, disarming the enemy vessels and rendering them powerless. In mere hours, the battle was over. The Dominion raiders were captured, their ships rendered useless, and the people of Talvri Prime were safe. News of humanity's victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. For the first time, other species saw what humanity was capable of. They had the power to crush their enemies, but they chose to show mercy. They had the strength to rule with fear, but they chose to build alliances based on trust. It was a message that resonated across the stars. The Dominion, now humiliated, withdrew into the depths of space, and other factions began to reconsider their stance on humanity. The warlords who had once seen humanity as a potential threat now saw them as a valuable ally. The galaxy began to change, slowly but surely, as species realized that humanity was a force for peace, not destruction. But there was still work to be done. The scars of centuries of war would not fade easily. Alliances were fragile, and there were still those who wished to see humanity fall. But with every victory, with every alliance, humanity's legacy grew stronger. In the end, the galaxy knew one thing for certain. No species would risk angering humanity again. They had seen what the Deathworlders were capable of, and they had learned that while humanity's power was unmatched, it was the strength of their honor and their mercy that made them truly unstoppable. Humanity had forged its place in the stars. The galaxy would never be the same again.